I know you recently gave a TED Talk yourself that focused in a huge way on the legacy of civil rights architect Septima Clark. Now, for anyone who doesn't know her, can you please introduce us to Septima Clark? And if she were here, what would she say about how to create communities of belonging?
All right. Hi, everyone. This is Septima Clark right here, in the glasses in the middle. And for those who don't know who she is quite possibly the most important person in the civil rights movement, but did so from behind the scenes. She was a school teacher, and from being a school teacher, speaking of belonging, she was fired from her job for joining the NAACP. She fought and she won in South Carolina against the school, which was an epic case. And then she moved to the Sea Islands and she started to teach farmers how to read. She mastered the art of teaching literacy, and through that art of teaching literacy, went on to educate tens of thousands of people all across the country to pass literacy, extra legal kind of literacy exams and tests, so that the entire voting rights movement was hinged on the ability, the idea that people could read, but the fact of the matter is that people could not. So she taught them directly how to read, and she trained other teachers to teach them to read. So that was her. What would she say? Listen. This whole conversation about belonging, I was like, I don't even know why I'm a part of it. I never feel like I belong. I was like, oh, well, this is probably why I am on here. I'm always looking for the help. Anytime I come into a place like this, I'm always looking for the black lady who's in the kitchen because I feel most comfortable with her. I'm always looking for the old man that's tying up the garbage cans out on the street, or the bags on the streets, because that's my uncle, that's my father. And I think what she would say about belonging is never underestimate the expertise and brilliance of the people who are working and serving. I think that's what she would say.
Amen to that. Yes. Mm-hmm. So part of what's so interesting to me about Girl Trek is that you all managed to get results that none of the public health officials with 1 million credentials after their names were able to get, and that was because you created a movement rather than an intervention. You thought a lot about belonging. So what's the secret sauce to how you make women throughout the country and increasingly throughout the world feel that?
So Girl Trek's a nonprofit. I'll be quick, I won't pitch. We are, listen, it's rough in these streets. Our goal is to inspire 1 million black women to take to the streets of their neighborhoods to heal their bodies, but also to take up space. And, people have asked me a lot, well, what happens when you get 1 million black women walking? And my answer is, we ask them what's next. Because I actually think that if you can activate real women who have been immobilized by fear and pain and disease and destruction and violence, if you can mobilize them to take action in the direction of their most fulfilled life, and if you can support each other in doing that, then you're about to unleash. My friend Brent said, you guys are the biggest Trojan horse in the whole country and nobody's watching. They think you're walking teams. And I was like, good. Don't record that. We are walking teams. 1 million black women walking together. I'll leave you with one quick story of how Girl Trek has scaled. I was in, is Brittany still here? Brittany Cooper? I just realized we were at Howard together. So Brittany, that year that I was at Howard, I went to a protest for Amadou Diallo, who had been killed by the police in Brooklyn. And me and a group of students from Howard went there, and Al Sharpton was there, and a bunch of folks was there, and the Nation of Islam was there. And it was just kind of like a planning rally. We were going to come back on Sunday, and Al Sharpton wanted us to walk around the Department of Justice like Jericho. It was very complicated. And the students were there outraged, and there was this brother who was there who looked to be homeless, and he kept raising his hand. And the Nation of Islam was like, not now, brother, not now. And he was like, not now, brother. So he was persistent, and he kept raising his hand. And finally, the gentleman who was in charge said, brother, what? Just tell us what you need to know. And he said, I know we're planning this big rally, but I want you to know that the number 21 bus don't run on Sunday, so half the people ain't gonna be able to get here. It was vital information that none of us knew because we didn't take the bus, but the people couldn't get there. And so in answer to, I always think about that brother. I was like, thank God he saved the rally. And I just think the reason Girl Trek succeeds is because, where's Onika? Because Onika was a volunteer and she knows New Orleans and she knows Brooklyn. That's why Girl Trek succeeded. No, I don't know how to mobilize women in your neighborhoods. And so we ask women to mobilize themselves, to bring their family and friends along in the spirit of Harriet Tubman, to go save yourself and then come back to your community to save the ones you love.
All right. Now, Dena, you've thought a lot about your feelings, obviously, in your leadership role at Yale. What would you say is our biggest misunderstanding about what makes people feel like they belong in a classroom, in a workplace, wherever, or even a movement like what Morgan was describing?
Right. So, hi everyone. How you doing? I have to ask that from the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. So I just had to say it. So I think when we think about belonging, I think people, when they think of diversity and they think of inclusion, and they're like, I've hired the black person. I've done my work. They must belong. You talked about the TED Talk I shared on Broadway about my experience going to boarding school, and I'm coming from the Bronx. So coming from the Bronx, going to boarding school. Is someone from the Bronx in here? We are always the loudest people in a room. It'd be like one of us who would be like, BX all day, every day, what? Yes, okay. So I came from the Bronx we grew up in a one-bedroom apartment with my mother who's from Antigua. And, for her, education was her better, her more. And so for her, that was education. And so we went to boarding school, and it was the first time that I realized that no one looked like me. But I also realized, as I reflect on this, my entire life, I grew up wanting to be white. I grew up, one of the first lessons I learned was to love white people. Because everything we do in this country is white-centered. Yeah. So when I go there, my first reaction is, I don't belong, no one looks like me, I'm not gonna have any friends. And so here I was, the doors opened for me. I was included, and we talk a lot about inclusion and diversity. I was included at my boarding school. I was at the table, but I was not welcomed. So there's a distinction between including someone and welcoming them, because I think including is very passive, and I think welcoming someone takes more work. So while I was there and in the room or at the table, there was a tape on me and there were shackles. So that, to me, I think when we think about diversity, we're like, have those we have those multicultural days, or we celebrate African American History Month, and we say, we check the box. The work of belonging is active, and we continuously have to do it.
Right.
It is active work.
I mean, being the first and only is something I think all of us can understand. Elle, you have any thoughts on what you just said? I mean, we could go on for a while.
Yeah, I mean, lots of thoughts about what she just said. Just the tape and shackles, I think, is something that, I don't know about the rest of you, but I felt many times in many different situations throughout my life. I think that inclusion is a fair topic in the conversation about belonging, because there is the idea of being included as the solution to solidarity with yourself, as opposed to belonging to yourself first. So I appreciate those perspectives around what inclusion is versus the idea of belonging, or even framing that as a conversation piece, because so much about our society is that you have to be included, or you have to get along with others who are different than you. There's not a lot of conversation about how you must get along with yourself in order to be a part of a thriving community, or to even be a part of a thriving movement or a society. So I love that conversation, because for me, it is more about what is the inclusion internally that I've done to actually accept all of the parts of me that I want to live on forever.
Right. I mean, Dena, it actually reminds me a little bit of your TED Talk. I mean, you talked about, this, just want to quote you accurately, there's emotional damage done when young people can't be themselves, when they are forced to edit who they are in order to be acceptable, it's a kind of violence. I just thought that was such a profound idea. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
All right, y'all ready? So yeah, thank you for reminding me of those words. So again, that came from my experience in boarding school. It came from like growing up in this country, and like one of the first lessons is to love white people before yourself. So constantly, even growing up, you know, wanting blue eyes and fairer skin and wanting long, luscious hair that my hands can go through, because as you can see, this is a problem, but you know, I love it now. I wanted to have my hair relaxed. Thank goodness that my mom did not relax my hair. Nonetheless, there is a trauma when everything you see in your schooling sends you the message that you do not belong. So our schooling is extremely Eurocentric. I went through my entire schooling, and it wasn't until I went to college that I read a writer of color. So once the absence of seeing yourself, and then two, if we think about the discipline rates, right? The school to prison pipeline. So you know that as soon as a kid of color walks into a school building, they are criminalized, shackled again. And you also look at the teachers in the classroom. Very rarely do you see models that look like you, role models that look like you. A kid of color does not need to look far to see negative images reflected at themselves. So constantly you are sent a single narrative of who you are. We have narratives of catastrophe and despair. So it's time for us to belong and to have narratives of triumph, of success, of we belong.
Well, I want to move on to Elle, my fellow Ohioan over here, but I just wanted to make sure, Morgan, if you had any thoughts on any of this.
Yeah, I have a different experience. I didn't grow up wanting to be white at all, and I know that may be hard to believe because what you describe is real and it's pervasive. But I was so far away from white. I was super poor growing up. I'm super black, I'm super tall, I'm not traditionally attractive. I came from a super Christian home. I was just extra, extra black. So I was just like, you know, so I had to learn early on that I wasn't actually meant to survive, like Audre Lorde said. So I knew that I had Klan dreams when I was a baby, when I was like first and second grade. I just reoccurring Klan dreams. So I never wanted to be white. There was such a violence in white culture for me that it took years to heal from, to be able to, and I really have worked hard at it. And so I say that because I come from a group of people who are so ignored that scores of us are dying and nobody's even talking about it. Do you understand what I mean? Like, not even just in gun violence, 137 black women will die today from heart disease. A whole plane filled of black women will die today from heart disease. And it's just, I used to say it needs to be on the cover of the New York Times until David Bornstein wrote about it. Now I can't say that no more. So thank you, David. But it needs, people, thank you, Courtney, thank you, John, because people need to know. So I'm saying I never wanted to belong to that culture. I wanted to run far away. I had issues with race, issues with class, issues with anything mainstream. I was always in a mode of resistance. I was always swallowing rage. And so I just had such a different experience. I was listening to you, just fascinated by that. And not that I don't understand it, because I do on some level, but I never even aspired to it, because there are levels to suffering and there are levels to oppression. And I'm saying I was at such a level where I was required to resist. Every single day I was required to stand up. I was required to build muscle. I'm just required to, because even I was coming in today, and this beautiful sister, she was just trying to do her job. She was like, excuse me. I was like, I'm gonna go to the bathroom. I know, but are you a part of this? Yeah, I'm a part of this. And it just strikes me, is it the energy I carry? Is it the way I look? And those small incisions every single day build up a callus or a scar on you, or you put on weight as armor, right? And so, like, what I am saying is that I have never wanted to belong to this culture, and in fact have isolated myself through rage and anger and obesity and anything that will keep me protected from you, the violent person. You understand what I mean? Which is the woman out at the desk. And she doesn't even know that she was being violent to me. It's these small incisions. And so when I was on, Courtney asked me to sit on this panel, I had no idea why. I was just like, can I be on the friendship panel? Like, I don't want to be. I don't like belonging. I've never belonged. I don't want to belong. Like,
And
I don't.
You belonged on the panel.
I don't want to.
You belonged on the panel.
Just get on out of here. That's all I had to. I don't have a conclusion. That was just the reaction.
Well,
Yeah.
Elle, I want to ask you about how all of us with these emotional keloids up here. Elle, I want to ask you about how your experience dealing with identity led you into your activism. I mean, because we both come from the same part of the world, but we do not have the same experience. I want to hear about yours.
Yeah, thank you both for sharing. I think it's really important to hear just the realities of lives lived. I didn't have, I had a similar experience. I grew up very, very, very Black. I actually wanted to be Blacker, if that was even a thing, because I was very different. Very, very different. And so I never really struggled with race, but I did struggle with gender and understanding what my relationship to gender was and how I needed to perform a gender in order to be my Blackest self. That was something that I struggled with intensely, just growing up in a very Midwest, very Black, very conservative, Christian, apostolic, Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost church. So I had a very, very, very different experience where I struggled. I struggled intensely, where I did hide from myself through food and through clothes and just through all of the things that I got to imagine myself being my true self, but also I got to hide from who I had to be in order to survive. So, without those struggles, I don't think I would have ever found my passion for organizing. I would have never found my voice without going through, really a lot of adversity, having to hide myself in the workplace so that I could keep a job that paid $12 an hour, or sleeping in a car because I wasn't welcomed in anyone's home as the woman that I was. So identity has played a huge part of my understanding of self, but also my understanding of the world and the ways that the world interacts with you based on not only your identity in relationship to gender, but also in relationship to who the world wants you to be. But yeah, shout out to Ohio, because it truly made and gave me everything that I am. Right. Yeah.
It just happens.
Ohio, always, baby. Always a Buckeye, always.
It's like a Pavlovian response. Now, for trans folks, obviously belonging is not just an aspiration. It can be the difference between life and death. And I'm not educating you on these numbers, but I feel like it's important to mention them. Fatal violence disproportionately affects transgender women of color. In 2017, advocates tracked at least 28 murders of transgender people in the United States, the most ever recorded. In 2018, of course, is not looking any safer. Does this notion of belonging feel academic in the context of that kind of urgency?
Well, I think it's just really, really important to touch on a couple of different things, especially in relationship to academics. One of the things that I do think is really, really important in reference to Black Trans Lives Matter is to just honor all of the women who contributed to why that actually is a conversation where you can say this person founded it or this person founded it. I didn't do anything but just participate and support other Black trans women. I don't typically out myself because I don't think that's actually necessary to the bigger picture. I think it is sensationalist at best for an audience, but for me, it's a truth that I don't need to share because I live it. But in regards to the academic notion, academics, and let me be clear, I'm not attacking academics. Academia did not have a relationship to the statistics about Black trans women until Black trans women advocated for ourselves and for our lives and for the women who were murdered. And so, thank you for the claps, because it's important to just acknowledge what happens when people are outraged and when people have grief and when people have anger. Somehow your anger and your outrage no longer belongs to you. So in a conversation about belonging, what does belong to you when something has been made about you, but also now everyone can access?
Right.
So I do think it's really important to just understand the statistics are great for painting a picture, but it does not change the reality nor the circumstances that create these numbers to begin with. But I do think it is helpful to at least provide a picture to those who are creating the statistics. I'm not killing trans women. I'm not killing cis people. I'm not the police, you know, so I do think statistics play a factor, but that can't ever be enough for what we consider our greatest action in the face of death and murder.
Right. Now, before I move on, I wanted to ask if anyone else had anything to say on that particular point.
I do work in academia, and I actually am very.
Did you see me looking at you? Okay.
Yeah. And I'm actually very critical. You know, I feel like, first of all, the fact I don't believe in expertise, right? Expertise separates me from my people. It's been used to separate me from my people. You know, you're in your ivory tower, and then those statistics no longer become people. And I think that's, you know, as someone who has a sick sister, my twin sister is chronically ill, and I see exactly what you're saying, how devalued her life is when she walks into the hospital. But she becomes her symptoms, right? She becomes her symptoms. She loses her humanity. And so sometimes when it gets to us, right, it loses its humanity. It loses the stories. And so I'm extremely critical, because if you think about the academia and the institutions like the one I worked, it was built on the blood of other people. It was, something was stolen. Something was stolen. And so it's important to say that. We are on stolen land, and you know, for us to have the money to do all of this stuff, it was stolen from someone, and we caricature the illness or the sickness, and then we profit off of it. And I won't put me in it, though. I know better than that, but.
Not all professors?
Huh?
Hashtag not all professors. Got it.
Hashtag not all.
Actually, I had a different response to you talking about the ownership of story and narrative. That to me was really interesting, because I mean, I had an epiphany. Like I have like a literal reaction to the word belonging, like a reaction to it. And when you said that, it was because belonging has a possessiveness to it, right? That there's an ownership, like you're belonging, like there's an ownership to the word in this weird way. And I just thought about, do you know who Big Mama Thornton is? So do you all know who Big Mama Thornton is? Some of you? Yeah. All right, so Big Mama Thornton was like a blues singer. Yes, look at you. Go ahead, entertain, party, experience. Yeah, so she's the one who started singing the song Hound Dog, and then Elvis Presley stole it from Big Mama Thornton. It was a big scandal. And he didn't even change the words. She was like, because you know, she was like a big woman, she was real sexy, and this man kept trying to come for her. She was like, you ain't nothing but a hound dog, always at my door, right? And then he sang it and it didn't even make sense, but and then he blew up, right? And then he's singing in these clubs, hound dog swinging his hips, totally appropriated like the lion and the feather. And then women who look like Big Mama Thornton weren't even allowed in the club that he was singing. Do you understand what I mean? So belonging is a dirty word to me, because you don't own my sense of belonging. Like, I take the belonging with me. You lucky if you get invited to the party. Like, I have to adapt that stance, because what I'm saying is the word belonging itself, or this notion that you own space, you own cultural access and rights, and all these things are like not even true. It's just not even true. So the framework of inclusion, the framework of do you belong or don't belong, like I loved what you talk about, like do you belong to yourself? Are you self-possessed in these ways? If we don't get real and righteous about that real quick, the real leaders of this movement will never stand up. And when I talk about this movement, I'm talking about spiritual enlightenment. I'm talking about taking us over the next horizon. We don't have time for no belonging and possessiveness and this and that, and you're in, you're out. Like, follow me because I know the way. Like, that's actually, like, I don't know. So I just have never really been concerned about that. Since a little girl, I've been just running full speed for my life. Just been running full speed for my life. So like me being a part of your track team ain't a question because I'm gonna outrun you. Do you understand what I mean? So that's how I feel about belonging. Again, I have issues with the panel.
I can't speak for everybody. I think this is exactly the right panel for you to be on.
You see what I meant? We found where you belong.
Haha, belonging. Gotcha. Elle, I want to talk about your website, marshap.org. You're starting the Marsha P. Johnson Institute that's scheduled to launch later this year. Can you tell those of us who don't know who Marsha was, who she was, what happened to her, and also what this institute will do?
So if you're excited about Pride, and I see this lovely glitterati is giving us all of the Pride energy. If you are excited about Pride, then you should know who Marsha P. Johnson is. She was an amazing woman who lived a full life as a supporter of gay rights. Marsha is famously known for, I want my gay rights. She was a participant in the Stonewall Rebellion. She was truly an advocate of all advocates. She was on the front lines of the response to HIV and AIDS outbreak here in New York City. And she is a trans icon, a trans pioneer, and truly is just a human rights pioneer for us all. I started the Marsha P. Johnson Institute when I was a part of starting a lot of things. And so the Institute has taken quite some time to be born, but I started it out of the question really around this theme or topic of belonging, because what I understood of Marsha was truly from the perspectives and the ideas of white gay men. I did not know Marsha P. Johnson because she was a Black trans woman. I knew her because of how she was uplifted as a Black trans woman, but I did not know anything about her life lived as a Black trans woman. And so one of the things that I was facing in being a part of a very large movement called Black Lives Matter is that there was this idea instantly of including Black trans women without actually ever providing any tools or support, or even just an understanding of what it is that Black trans women needed to truly be fully supported in the world. And so I started playing with the question of what would have happened if Marsha P. Johnson would have gotten the great support that she needed, as opposed to just being included in a gay rights movement for gay men. And so I wanted to create something where trans women, Black trans women, had a space that was our own, where we didn't have to be included. We didn't have to beg for scraps. We didn't have to beg for anything because we had created it for ourselves. So the Institute was scheduled to launch in the spring, but we are now launching later this summer. But I bring this up because I had battled illness up until this point, still battling illness, honestly. And the question around belonging it's just been on my mind. It's really been on my mind. It's been on my mind in relationship to belonging to a movement, belonging to a community, whether that's in Columbus or in Washington, D.C., or formerly in Harlem. The question around belonging and even, does the Institute belong? I've been having that conversation, because I think it is a constant conversation we must have with ourselves about what we are putting out into the world. If you're not having a conversation of whether something is necessary or not, I think you end up with crap, quite honestly. But the Institute is launching this summer, and it's turned into such a beautiful project that I'm really excited to be a part of. One of our board members is here. But it is now a full human rights organization for trans people, and that's something that I'm really excited about having, because as the world becomes more knowledgeable about statistics relating to our lives, that means there must be opportunities to change those statistics. So this is my part, and hopefully everyone will continue to do their part to ensure that communities have chances at living and thriving and not just being topics on the news.
Indeed, indeed. Well, thank you very much. We'll unfortunately run out of time, but I want to thank you all for letting me belong to this particular conversation. Dena, Elle, Morgan, I really do appreciate your time. Thank you very much.